What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Happy Monday. Welcome back to Call to Communion. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith. Maybe you're a little unclear as to how to get those questions answered. Well, guess what? This show is just for you. It's a program specifically for non-Catholics. Now, we also do take calls from Catholics who perhaps are dealing with a particular issue with maybe a non-Catholic friend or somebody at work. So that's the sort of the purview of the program. What is keeping you from becoming a Catholic? Or how can you help a brother, somebody that you know from work, who has questions about the Catholic faith? This program is for you as well. Here is our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response. It'll come really quick. And then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Again, the phone number 833-288-EWTN. I'm Tom Price, along with Michael Birchfield, our fantastic producer, Matt Gubinski, phone screener of the stars. Also, Jeff Burson, our social media maven, who will pass along any questions that you may want to pose via YouTube or Facebook. Hey, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Hey, Tom. How are you today?
Couldn't be better. How was your Father's Day weekend?
Busy.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Did you do dad-centric things?
No, I did dad activities, like trying to take care of kids, basically. And I had a sick wife, and so it was a gratifying, satisfying kind of day, but it's not like the whole world suddenly turned and revolved around me, which is just as well. I'd be in worse shape if it had, right?
Probably so. We're going to lead off.
How about you?
You know what? Oh, thanks for asking. Very, very nice. Had dinner, had lunch, a late lunch with some friends. Went to Mass. Adrienne was singing at one of the local churches here, and then watched a great movie last night. So I would call it really good. And Adrienne gave me a wonderful, beautiful gift, which now I'm consumed with guilt because it's a little too nice. So I'm trying to figure out whether to take it back or just be a good guy and say thank you.
Well, there was a Catholic. No, I better not.
We're going to let that one go, eh?
Yeah, okay.
Sounds good. Here's an email. We're getting some of these calls screened right now. Sounds fair. Phone number 833-288-EWTN. Here's an email from Frank. He is a Lutheran. He says, Matthew 1, verse 25 says, Joseph, quote, did not know her until she brought forth her firstborn son. So if Mary remained a virgin for life, why does the scriptures essentially say she didn't have marital relations until after the birth of Jesus?
Yeah, thanks. It doesn't say that she had marital relations after the birth of Jesus, and you're reading that conclusion into the preposition until.
Until.
Okay. Well, we don't have a preposition in the English language that corresponds exactly to the Greek preposition heos. All right? Which simply means here's one state of affairs from now until this other designated time. All right?
Okay, all right.
And the English preposition until suggests that state of affairs sort of transitions after that terminus. Okay? The Greek preposition doesn't suggest that. So, for instance, St. Paul writes someplace, continue the reading of the Scriptures until I come.
Yes, it does.
So are we supposed to infer from that passage that after he showed up, they quit reading the Scriptures?
Well, I would hope not.
You see?
Yeah,
Right?
I do.
And so this is just an etymological fallacy, right? This argument. It's trying to read into a Greek term, because the Bible is written in Greek, a concept that's peculiar to the English semantics of the English word until. Anytime you deal in translation, all right, you have to get into interpretation. And and so sometimes you have to stretch a little bit to find an appropriate word, and you do the best you can.
Right.
All right. In I speak English, but in the French language, there's not a word for lap.
Really?
Yeah, and in French, there's not an exact equivalent for the English word river. We've got rivière and fleuve, but like it doesn't quite get the job done. And there are plenty of examples of that in languages. All right, and you just make a mistake if you're good. The most egregious example of this I ever heard was a friend of mine who was a biblical studies major in graduate school, PhD, and he'd gone to a fundamentalist Baptist college, and he heard a sermon one time based on what Hebrews 11, isn't it, where we read that now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and evidence of things not seen, and on about all the heroes of faith in the chapter, and he took from the King James version. This preacher did the word now. All right, now faith. All right, and made his whole sermon an analysis of the sort of the temporal adverbial now, like it's now versus then or later. Faith has a sort of present dimension to it.
Yes.
All right. Nothing like that is conveyed by the Greek word that is translated now. It's more like, it's just this, the Greek word is just this, all right, next on the horizon.
Change of thought.
Right. We're going to talk about,
okay.
And is classic case of the same kind of thing.
Wow.
So, the premise of your question is faulty.
Okay. Here's one more question from the same fellow, Frank the Lutheran, who says, I have recently listened to 4 Catholic...
Oh, Frank's a Lutheran?
He is a Lutheran.
Well, his man Martin Luther believed in the perpetual virginity of Mary, so what's he worried about? Well, go ahead. Keep going.
Good point. Here's what he says, his second question. I have recently listened to 4 Catholic parish sermons online. They were a little short for my taste, but otherwise okay, except for one thing. None of them preached directly or indirectly God's love, grace, and mercy from the cross. For me, not to make at least a brief statement about the gospel is unsettling, to put it mildly. What do you say?
Well, stop the presses. Let's reorient the entirety of Catholic worship around what Frank finds unsettling. All right. You're coming to Catholic worship imagining that Catholic homiletics, Catholic preaching, or Catholic liturgy ought to conform to some arbitrary norm that you have set up as, like, this is how I define the essence of a real Christian worship service. And first of all, I ought to tell you that if you remove the homily from a Catholic liturgy completely, right, just take it out of there. Well, licitly, you can't do that. All right, I mean, like, the priest is required to preach a homily. Okay. For Sunday, at least he's supposed to. Although I've seen priests give it up sometime during daily mass. But if you take the homily out, nothing essential is lost. Nothing essential is lost to the mass. And the big difference between Catholic worship and Protestant worship is not the content of the homily. All right, it's why are we there? All right, and many Protestants think that they go to church in order to hear a homily that conveys a message. All right, the communication, the dissemination of information. Catholics go to Mass to offer a sacrifice. All right, and so the first half of the Mass, what we call the Liturgy of the Word, is there simply to get us in the proper disposition to make an offering of ourselves along with the offering of Christ to God the Father in reparation for the sins of the world. That's the whole dynamism of the Catholic Mass, okay? And so unless you understand that, of course you're not going to properly assimilate what takes place. All right. Secondly, the proclamation of the love of God present to us in the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus and communicated to us by the Holy Spirit is everywhere in the Mass from start to finish. If you actually read the words of the liturgy, all right, the ordinary of the Mass, those prayers that are always the same, if you read or listen to very attentively to the canon of the Mass or the Eucharistic prayers, all right, you will find so much rich theology about the death and resurrection of Jesus and the love of God present in that Paschal mystery for our salvation that you will not be able to take it in, all right? I mean, consider prior to the reception of Holy Communion as one very small example in what is a much richer liturgy, the Agnus Dei, Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world, have mercy on me.
Yes.
Lamb of God, who takes away grant us peace. I mean, And we could go through the entire liturgy like that way. And you're reciting and saying these things over and over and over and over and over again. I once worked in a Protestant institution. It was a school. And we used in our application packet to admit new families, one of the questions from James Kennedy's famous evangelism explosion, right, which was a method of trying to evangelize people. And the question was, if God asked you, why should I let you into my heaven, what would you say? And we thought this was a surefire way of like ferreting out Catholics who had a works, quote unquote, works-based understanding of salvation and didn't understand the mercy or the love of God. Well, the whole time I worked at that school, only one Catholic family applied. And they gave the best answer to that question of anybody. I said, what would you say if God asked, why should I let you in? Their answer was, have mercy upon me, God, a sinner.
Wow.
All right. And it recalls the words again of the liturgy, all right, from the Roman centurion that whose servant Christ healed, when we say, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, my soul shall be healed. All right. It's there from start to finish. Now, when it comes to the actual homily, a Catholic priest, generally speaking, should unfold some aspect of the mystery of redemption, grounded however loosely in the texts of the scripture readings or the liturgy itself. And look, Catholic priests are human beings that vary widely in their skill of doing that. And one of the big differences between the Catholic model of ministry and the Protestant model of ministry, many times Protestants go to seminary because they find that they have skill at speaking. They are good rhetoricians.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That is not the principal reason that Catholics are drawn to pastoral ministry, that someone has tapped them as a good communicator. It's rather that they are capable of carrying the burden of being an alter Christus, another Christ, and reenacting in their own person the death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ present to us in the sacraments. And some of the most skillful Catholic priests I have ever known have been just awful homilists, all right, but amazing pastors.
Okay. There it is. Hey, Frank, thank you so much for both of your questions. We hope that is helpful for you. In a moment here, we'll be talking with Ashley in Olympia, Washington, beautiful part of our country. Charles in Lake Wales, Florida. We've got a couple of lines open at the moment, 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. Call to communion here on EWTN.
Sharing the fullness of the Catholic faith. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986. This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Raymond Arroyo.
We need EWTN Radio for the reason that Mother Angelica founded this enterprise. She saw this as a holistic approach, reaching the whole person, bringing them truth and life.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Have you heard of Amazon Echo? It's a virtual personal assistant that allows you to use just your voice. You can listen to EWTN Radio just by saying, Alexa, play EWTN Radio. Check out the Amazon Echo today.
60 on 10 with Monsignor Charles Pope.
The third commandment, remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. You know, of all the commandments, it might seem that we would get this one right. After all, it commands us to rest one day. But so often we're off to our own pursuits. God asks us to take one day to stop, reflect, rejoice, spend time with Him and with our family. But so often we're running everywhere else. It's also a day for worship. The book of Leviticus says, 6 days work shall be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest and a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is the Sabbath of the Lord. And the book of Hebrews says that we should not neglect to meet together, as is a habit of some. And so again, we're asked by God to spend time reflecting and worshiping, and likewise spend time with our family. The third commandment, remember to keep holy the Sabbath day.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
Before the break, we were talking about the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and I got to tell you, there is nothing like it on God's green earth. You can check out the holy sacrifice of the Mass right here on EWTN radio and television. We bring it to you live from Our Lady of the Angels Chapel each and every morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN radio and television. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Ashley in Olympia, Washington, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Hey, Ashley, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Before I ask my question, I just want to thank you guys for your last encouraging answer when I called last time. You really renewed my hope, and it made me feel a lot better, so thank you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, so my other question I have this time is, I was wondering if it's a sinful act to speak to relatives who have been deceased. My father, I lost him 11 years ago, and I like to talk to him sometimes. I have bipolar depression as well as being blind, and I find a lot of comfort by talking to him. But I was wondering, I read somewhere online that maybe it was a sin to do so, and so I was just wondering whether it's okay to say hi to him sometimes or not.
I appreciate the question, Ashley. Thank you very much. It depends on how you're doing so. All right. So there's a proper way to do this, and there's a wrong way to do this. If you have reason to believe that your father was a man of faith and charity, that he died in the grace of God, if you believe him to be in heaven or even potentially in purgatory, then it's appropriate to ask for the prayers of those who have predeceased us. And the Catholics, all Catholics do this in the way of venerating the saints and asking for their prayers and intercessions. And, I don't have to, my relative does not have to be a canonized saint for me to ask for his or her prayers in this way. I have a grandfather myself, a man of great integrity, who was not a Catholic, but he was a man of faith and holiness, that I, would presume, basically, on the preponderance of evidence, more likely than not to be in heaven. And I have, with some frequency, asked for my grandfather's prayers and intercessions on my behalf, and that's allowable, okay? And look, when you pray and ask for the intercession of the saint, there's no reason that can't be done in a conversational and colloquial kind of way, we pronounce these kinds of words of affection even to the Blessed Virgin, and sometimes, quite poetically, and my life and my sweetness and my hope, and this kind of language.
Sure.
So it's okay. That's fine. All right. What we can't do, what's not allowable, is any kind of recourse to mediums or spiritists or Ouija boards or seances or tarot cards or any kind of divination or magic or necromancy, any attempt to contact the dead and speak to them that way, to kind of manipulate the other world to serve our purposes. That's all the sin of superstition, and it's a grave sin against the first commandment. So if we're talking about a pious devotion to the holy saints, among whom your father may be one, and a genuine desire to seek their prayers and intercessions, leaving the results up to God, that's allowable. That's fine. Trying to reach out to them, pass through the veil, so to speak, and coerce an answer out of them by way of magic, that's deeply wrong.
Yeah. Ashley, is that helpful for you?
Yeah, it helps a lot. Thank you very much for taking my call.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
You are most welcome. That opens up a line for you now. 833-288-EWTN is our number, 833-288-3986. Those of you who are watching on EWTN television can certainly participate by sending us an email, ctc@ewtn.com. Let's go now to Charles in Lake Wales, Florida. Hey there, Charles. What's on your mind today? Charles in Florida?
Yes.
Go right ahead. You need to turn your set down, if you would, please. Are you there?
Are you ready for my question?
Please continue. Yeah, turn your radio down or your TV down or whatever it is that's distracting you. That would be very helpful.
I don't know my number. I'm calling from a cell phone.
How can we help you today? Okay,
There
you know
would be
what?
the number that shows
if
up
you
on yours.
if you would please, we'll just put him on hold. We'll get back with Charles in just a couple of minutes. Here's Randy now in Madison, Wisconsin. Randy, what's on your mind today?
Dr. Anders, I can listen to you all day. You're so calm and so generous with how you answer questions. I love you. But
Well, I love you too, Randy. Thank you very much.
You bet. I've got a question that I don't think I've ever heard you answer, and that is, my mission for the rest of my life is to convert every Protestant to the Catholic faith. And my question to you is, has there ever been a time in the history of Protestantism where either the Blessed Mother or Jesus Christ showed themselves to a Protestant? I know it's happened where Jesus Christ has kind of showed himself to a Muslim, and I've heard some conversions there, but I've never heard Jesus Christ or Mary showing themselves to a Protestant. And if they did, then I don't need to really try to convert anybody. What do you think?
Randy, I appreciate the question, and if you would allow, I think I'd like to take this from a slightly broader perspective, because I think that, well, the specific question is about apparitions of Jesus or the Blessed Virgin to Protestant believers, but what's motivating this question is your concern for evangelism, ecumenism, and inter-Christian dialogue. All right, so let me take it from both angles. Okay. With respect to the question of apparitions, the deposit of Catholic faith does not teach specifically that Christ or the Blessed Virgin has ever appeared to anyone after, say, the apparitions to St. Paul that we read about in the book of Acts. Okay, beyond that, the deposit of faith is silent. That is to say, what are Catholics obligated to believe, right? And that's it. So while there are many anecdotes in sacred history, well, actually in ecclesiastical history, about apparitions of saints or angels or the Blessed Virgin or of Christ, those are not part of the deposit of faith, and a Catholic is not obligated to believe them. Even highly regarded apparitions like Lourdes or Fatima, Garabandal, whatever you have it, famous Marian apparitions. Jesus' appearance to St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, whatever you have it, whatever these Catholic claims to apparitions or private revelation are, it's not part of the deposit of faith, and Catholics are not obligated to believe that these things are veridical. All right, so that I'm just throw that out there. So I don't think the question of apparitions really answers it one way or the other, because look, a Catholic can claim to have had an apparition of Jesus or Mary and be lying or be deceived. All right. The same thing would be true of anybody else, whether they're Muslim or Protestant or whoever. All right. At the same time, sacred history itself tells us that God, Christ, the angels appear to all kinds of people for all kinds of reasons. All right. So think about Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. Cornelius was not a Catholic when an angel appeared to him and told him to send to Joppa for a man named Peter, all right, to tell him the way to be saved. But his good deeds, his prayers and gifts to the poor had come up before God as an offering, and God sent him a very particular grace in the form of an angelic visitation. And way back in the Old Testament, God would speak to pagan prophets sometimes and compel them to prophesy things they didn't want to say. All right? So, the question of apparition or not apparition, I think, is not relevant. Now, if God wants to appear to anybody, he can do it, and who am I to stop him? All right. Now, I think what really motivates your question is what's the right attitude to take towards our Protestant brothers and sisters? I'll tell you my attitude personally. My job isn't to convert anybody, all right, because I don't have that power, okay? And if I feel like I can coerce somebody into conversion, then I'm seeking to manipulate people.
Not good.
All right, and I'm trying to exert my will over them.
Mm-hmm.
And I might do that for my own aggrandizement, for my own pride or vanity, or to put a feather in my cap and say, look how many converts I've made, or whatever. And I'm not motivated by charity. I'm motivated by selfishness and pride if I take that attitude. All right. Christ said, you didn't choose me, I chose you. Christ said, no one can come to me except the Father draw him. All right. The work of faith is supernatural work. Okay. What my goal is to remove barriers, to break down barriers to Catholic faith. That's why we pitch the show the way we do. What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? I'm not here to tell you you have to become Catholic, because I can't make you do that. I want to say, what's your understanding of the Catholic faith? What do you think about Catholicism? Is that the right thing to think? Do you have a problem with the Catholic Church? Do you like the Catholic Church? Have you got something hanging you up? How can I help you?
Yeah.
I have a very, 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 very close relative, a very dear relative of mine, who said to me one time, should I become Catholic? Even to that very close relative, who I love with all my heart and soul and would die for, I did not say, you have to become a Catholic. What I said instead was, you know what I do. You know what I do. When you become persuaded that the Catholic Church is true and you have to join, I'll help you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your call. When we come back, we'll be talking with Julie in the Yup, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Also, looks like Rick in Florence, Kentucky, Jacob in Toledo, Ohio. Lots more on this edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. Don't go away.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Our mission is to transform the world one woman at a time through a spiritual program of formation that helps them to see who they are as daughters of the Most High God and to enjoy the gift that God has given to them by virtue of their femininity.
Women of Grace with Jeanette Bankovic-Williams. Tomorrow morning, 11 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Hi, this is Doug Keck, and this is an EWTN bookmark brief. I just finished speaking with Dr. Edward Shree about his latest book, Into His Likeness, Be Transformed as a Disciple of Christ. And Dr. Shree, tell us, what's this book all about?
What is discipleship all about in Scripture? And if I had to pick one word that sums it up, it's the word imitation. A rabbi would gather disciples and didn't just train them to get a good grade on their catechism quizzes. It was a training in a whole way of life. And the goal was to imitate the life of the rabbi. Jesus gathered disciples together and invites them to not just learn his teachings, but to imitate his whole way of life. That's what the Christian life is all about, growing in holiness, growing in sanctity. It's all about the imitatio Christi.
Okay, very good. Into His Likeness is the title, Be Transformed as a Disciple of Christ. Dr. Edward Shree is the author. It's available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. Look for the whole interview. Coming soon, right here on Bookmark. And thank you for stopping by. I'm Doug Keck.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
You remember the time I said on the air, go to confession. And when you're done, go out and have a big ice cream soda. Celebrate. And a man wrote to me, he says, you know, I hadn't gone to confession in 30 years. Do you mind if I went and had a pizza? I said, oh, have 20 pizzas.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Later today on Catholic Answers Live, theologian and scientist Stacy Trasenkos joins us for a discussion of issues in faith and science. Catholic Answers Live, 6 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Now back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
Glad you could join us for the Monday edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. By the way, on Wednesday, David and I are going to powwow an hour earlier, and we're going to record, I'm sure you know about this, David, we're going to record a mailbag edition of our program. You've given me that blank look like, oh, really? We are?
Yeah, I love it when people tell me things I know.
Well, I thought Mr. Birchfield sent you an email.
In my other job, my office, is a woman that I work with who was telling a new employee the other day, look, this is how you have to handle David. Don't just ask him if he'll get around. Go stick it under his nose and tell him to sign it.
Okay.
And that's why I'm always asking our producer, okay, I'm happy to be there. Just call, text, and email me and remind me.
What did Colonel Blake always say on MASH? What am I signing, Radar?
Right. Exactly.
What am I signing, Radar? Anyway, the reason I bring all that up is because we're always looking for great emailed questions that you can send us for the mailbag edition of the program. And here is the address, ctc@EWTN.com, ctc@EWTN.com. We may not get it to it right away, but we will get to it. Back to the phones right now at 833-288-EWTN. Julie is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Hey there, Julie. What's on your mind today?
Well, first of all, thank you for your program. It's most interesting, and I enjoy it.
Well, thank you.
But my question is this. A couple of weeks ago, you talked about when we look up to God and call on Him in whatever situation, actually it is God calling us. Each time we call on Him, it's God who instigates it and calls. Have I got that correct? And if not, can you expound on that lesson a little better?
Thank you. I appreciate it. So, of course, it's a dogma of the Catholic faith that God is in control of everything, including free human action. All right? God is not surprised by anything. Right? God is not sitting on the edge of his seat, so to speak, chewing on his fingernails, wondering how the story is going to turn out. Okay? And Jesus says there's not a sparrow falls apart from the will of our Heavenly Father. God is literally in control of absolutely everything. And, of course, he sustains all of reality and being at every moment. The Catholic doctrine of creation is instructive here. Creation is not so much a point in time as a relationship, all right? The nature of the relationship between the Creator and the creature. We stand in a created relationship of radical dependence upon God for our very being. St. Paul says of him, in him we live and move and have our being. All right? So that, if God were to blink, so to speak, there we would go.
Bye-bye.
And there's a Protestant theologian who I have a high regard for named Jonathan Edwards, early American thinker, who once said, and I think it's a beautiful metaphor, God hums the world. Beautiful. All right. If you think about the relationship of the musician to music, that is probably a better metaphor for understanding God's relationship with the world than the metaphor of an artisan to an artifact. Because an artisan can build an artifact and then set it aside. All right. But a musician, once he stops playing, poof, there goes the,
sure,
pop goes the weasel. There goes the music. All right. That's the nature of our relationship to God. So in a universe like that, everything that happens falls within the scope of God's providence. Now, here's the mystery and the beauty of the thing. That doesn't destroy our free agency. All right. And this was a big issue between the Catholics and the Protestants in the 16th century. Protestants said, look, if God has that kind of control over reality, then humans have no free will. And they were okay with that. They were okay with the idea that we don't have free will. The Catholic Church has always said, no, we really do have free will. So how do you square that? How do you square God's absolute control over human history with the fact that we actually have free agency and can cooperate in a sort of contributive kind of way to the divine plan? Good question. Good question. All right, and that is actually one of the mysteries. The mystery of free will is one of the mysteries of Catholic faith. How do you square those two things? What we don't do is carve off a realm of human action that falls somehow out of the scope of divine providence and say, over here this belongs to me, and over there that belongs to God, and I have total control over what happens in the human sphere, and God has total control over everything else. No. Even in the Catechism, I think it's around paragraph 600-ish, says that even our free response to God falls within the divine plan of predestination. So we don't deny that humans have free agency, that we really do cooperate. All right, we really do. All right, but in a way that is utterly dependent on God. So he sets up the conditions, of course, that make that cooperation possible. Trivial. Well, not trivially, but kind of reductively, God is even right now as we speak, sort of maintaining my neurology, in operation. And all of my human faculties of knowing and acting and thinking and feeling and smelling, and all my motivational systems that make me want to drink green tea right now rather than soft drink. All that as well falls within the scope of divine providence, so that my actions are cooperated with by God as well as me cooperating with Him. In terms of the work of my salvation, there's a beautiful metaphor that a friend of mine proposed that it's not a total explanation, but I find it helpful. If you imagine a father pushing a heavy load in a wheelbarrow up a hill, and here comes his 2-year-old toddling along, and bracket off the potential risk of the wheelbarrow running backwards over the 2-year-old. 2-year-old wants to help Dad, and Dad could do it easier without the 2-year-old. Doesn't need the 2-year-old's help, and 2-year-old doesn't really contribute anything like doesn't contribute anything needful. Put it that way.
Right.
But Dad says, okay, come along and help. And so the kid puts his hand on the back of the wheelbarrow and pushes for all he's worth. You can just picture it in your mind's eye.
Yeah.
Mom would be smiling her head off on the corner, and they get to the top of the hill, and you say, well, what happened? What did the kid contribute? Was his participation meaningless? Far from it. Not only was it not meaningless, it was beautiful. It was beautiful and praiseworthy and noble.
Yes.
All right. And it required the Father's benign condescension. The Father has to allow this, not because he needs it, but has this. It's intrinsically beautiful. It's a wonderful thing, right?
Sure.
Did the dad need it? Not at all. Could the kid have pushed the wheelbarrow up the hill without Dad? Not a second, not even an inch. Couldn't have gotten it off the ground.
Yeah.
All right. And yet his cooperation was both needless, but real, although utterly dependent on the Father's good pleasure, and totally within the scope of the Father's direction. If Dad wanted to turn the wheelbarrow to the left, there it goes to the left.
Yeah.
So working together, they got it to the top of the hill.
Very good. Julie, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. 833-288. EWTN is our phone number. Let's go to Jacob now in Toledo, listening to us on Annunciation Radio. Hey, Jacob, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm a recent convert to Catholicism, and my question is sort of about how we lead others to the church, and not specifically our friends and our family, but I'm just wondering, are we called to play a role in the conversion of people we meet every day that we might not be able to invest in?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate this a lot. So yes, absolutely, with one qualification. I prefer not to describe it in terms of a role in converting people, all right, because conversion is a supernatural work of grace on the human heart, okay, which I can't accomplish. I can't cause somebody to convert, okay. What I can do is seek to make Christ present in the world in as many ways and as effectively as possible. And that might take the form of a radio broadcast when I answer questions about the Catholic Church and try to present Catholic doctrine winsomely and effectively. All right, but that's a kind of low down the totem pole form of witness, honestly. Okay, it's not the greatest form of witness. The greatest form of witness that I could make to the reality of Christ in the world is to die a martyr, honestly. All right. The second greatest witness I could make to the presence of Christ in the world, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, would be to live a life of complete, total, consecrated virginity. All right. So the most privileged way of witnessing, manifesting Christ is the death of martyrdom. The second way would be a life of perfect continence and consecrated virginity. Religious life, and then beyond that, there are several other vocations in the Catholic Church that can be lived very generously and effectively. One of them would be a vocation to the sacred priesthood, where preaching and teaching is part of my office if I'm a priest, but the office of witnessing and making Christ present comes to characterize the whole quality of my being. All right, I receive a gracious quality and a permanent imprint, if you will, of Christ's priestly office on my person if I'm a priest, that I never lose. I'm a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, the scriptures say. All right, so that everything I do takes on a priestly character, especially the holy sacrifice of the Mass and reconciliation and the celebration of the sacraments, okay? If that's not my vocation, perhaps my vocation is to married life. In my own case, it is to married life, okay? And in married life, what am I called to do? I'm called to lay down my life for my spouse in order to bring her to God, as per Ephesians chapter 5. And the Church teaches that the marriage state, the marriage vocation, is a privileged and ecclesial state. It participates in the witness and the being of the Church to make Christ present in the world. And then trying to manifest the love of God in my home, my family life, bring my wife, my children to God, and be a source of service and love and generosity to the people around me. All right, we all know Catholic families like this. You look at them and they just seem to be diffusive in love and generosity and goodness. And they may not be particularly skilled at preaching or evangelizing or doing apologetics, but it's, in my own life, all the apologetics I ever heard in my life, at best, took away some of the objections to Catholic faith. But it was the few the very, very few who had lived lives of exceeding holiness and sanctity, who you could just smell Jesus on them, they're the ones that really made me want it all to be true.
Okay.
You see?
Yeah.
So the question is, do we as lay people have a role to play? Our role is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. The church exists in a certain way for the sake of the laity. Cardinal Newman once made a joke about that. He said the church would look silly without the laity.
Sure would.
And it sure would,
Yeah.
And two documents you might want to read on this. One, if you haven't familiarized yourself with the text of the Second Vatican Council, the dogmatic constitution called Lumen Gentium, okay, Light of the Nations, which is the church's statement about itself, how the church, and of course it's the whole people of God, clergy and laity together, okay. Another one, and is specifically on the mission of evangelism, one of the first documents from the pontificate of Pope Francis, which I think is really one of the best things that, like textually, that has come out of the Vatican in the last 5 years, and that's Evangelii Gaudium, on the joy of the gospel. It's all about the call to missionary discipleship and evangelism and what that means. And one of the things that Pope Francis brings out is, yes, it can mean a privileged form of apologetics. He actually calls for apologetics in that document. But it can also be called, how we live our professional lives, how we live our marital lives, how we live our social lives. We can express Christ in everything that we do, everywhere we go. And I'll tell you a brief little anecdote from my own family life. My dad was in business and a practicing attorney for 50 some odd years, and he wasn't a Catholic, but he was a Christian man, and he had a strong reputation of fidelity to his wife and to the institution of marriage. And he worked with guys that would often, go out on business trips and then go hit the bars and the so-called gentlemen's clubs, and he was so well known to always resist those allurements. If they were in the cab and they said, "Hey, head down here," my dad would say, "Stop the cab.
Let me out."
And he'd just get out of the cab right there.
Wow.
And it got to the point where when some of the younger guys would start coming along and the older fellows would start working on them, they'd go, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go with you if Anders will go." And they were like, "Oh, give it up. Anders will never go."
Yeah.
So that's he wasn't preachy, all right?
Didn't have to be.
But you know what? The fruit of that was that people would come to him and say, "Hey, I'm thinking of leaving my wife." And why did they go to him?
Because he was living it.
They knew he'd tell them the right thing to do.
Exactly.
And he always said the same thing. Don't do it. It's a sin.
Yeah.
Don't do it. You want to go to hell? Don't do it.
There you go.
And so you know what? He saved marriages that way. He saved marriages, and several. How? By quietly, but insistently refusing to cooperate with evil.
Beautiful. Jacob, thank you so much for your call. We hope that's helpful for you. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. In a moment, we'll be getting to Rick in Kentucky. First of all, I want to talk for just a moment here about the wonderful EWTN app. If you don't have this on your phone or on your tablet, you are really missing something wonderful. You can take along EWTN television, take along EWTN radio, this show. You can also listen to live streams of all of our radio and television services, and you can listen to audio on demand. If you liked today's show, you can listen to it tomorrow or the next day or next year. It's fantastic. Download program schedules, prayers, devotionals, EWTN News. It's all right there on our wonderful app. Do check it out, EWTNapps.com, EWTNapps.com. Let's go to Rick now. He is not. We're going to go to Bill. Bill is in Philadelphia, listening to us there. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
I have two questions.
Yes, sir.
First is, what happens to a marriage after it's divorced and it's granted a annulment by the tribunal hearing, and the letter that was received said that, it was granted, and under the eyes of the Catholic Church, it is as if the marriage had never happened and that you're free to marry in the Catholic Church again. What is the disposition of those children? Am I and my siblings considered illegitimate? I don't think I am, but I'm not an expert on canon law and what Rome thinks. Secondly, what happens to a Catholic soul who does not receive last rites?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question, Bill. Both questions. first of all, in your own case, certainly the church does not consider you to be illegitimate. You are a privileged son of the church and a child of God, and entitled to all of the both civil and canonical privileges that you were entitled to before. So your status in the church has not changed whatsoever at all. And I'm sorry to hear about your parents' situation. All right, and that you conveyed to the call screener. I will tell you that when the church grants an annulment, it is saying that we find that there was a defect at the moment that the marriage was contracted. We found some impediment that would have prevented the marriage from being lawfully contracted if that impediment had been known about. All right, and so we don't see a valid marriage here. Okay, now. Most people don't get their marriages brought before a marriage tribunal for consideration. Okay? And so there are a lot of people running around living happy lives, all right, who are leaving unaddressed the question of, well, you know, if I were to take this to a marriage tribunal and have it looked at, what would they say? Okay? And the church always presumes the validity of a marriage. So if you don't ask, they're not going to judge, and we're going to truck along assuming the grace of God here, okay? And when there is an annulment granted, the church is not saying, well, you know, everything that happened that was good between you or all the experiences that you may have had are suddenly, and all of those experiences are suddenly invalidated. No, it's not doing that. And the church is never judging the question of grace in an individual human life, because the grace escapes our experience, okay? And God can extend grace in extra sacramental ways that we don't know about, all right? And so, you know, it's necessary to have something like a marriage tribunal. It's necessary, okay? Because I have to have a way to determine, am I in a lawful relationship, if the question should arise for some reason, okay? I need to be able to figure that out in the marriage tribunal. And this is actually an act of mercy. You know, because I know traditions that they may teach the indissolubility of marriage, but they've got no way to deal with this issue. And so somebody gets divorced. What do? How do you regard the second relationship? And for lack of a better response, they just throw up their hands and go, well, the first one fell apart, try and do better with the second one. All right? And that's not the Catholic's attitude. I mean, the Catholic really, really believes in the indissolubility of marriage. But to put teeth on that, you've got to begin spelling that conviction out legally in the form of legislation, or otherwise it's just a platitude. Right? You got to be able to spell that out, what that looks like on paper. And this brings us a little bit to your second question when I talked about grace escaping our experience. The sacraments, whether marriage or last rites, you know, or holy unction, are real, tangible, and visible signs of interior graces. And where there is a valid sacrament, we know there is truly grace. Right? That's why Christ instituted them, to give us psychological certainty about something that escapes our experience. You know, if I want to, do I have the grace of God? Am I going to be saved? Okay. Well, Christ said, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have life. All right. My communion in the church is a tangible sign of my communion with him. All right. That's incredibly confidence building. That gives me great assurance in my Christian life to move forward and to attempt to live a life of holiness. But in the absence of that visible sign, if I'm denied that sign for some reason beyond my control, and it's not my fault, right? Does that mean that I'm also denied all grace? No, it doesn't mean that. Right? The sacrament is there as a mercy, as a divine condescension to my situation, all right, to encourage and help me on my way. But if for some reason beyond my control I can't get to the sacrament, does that mean that God doesn't extend me grace? It doesn't mean that. It doesn't. And for that matter, even if a soul has access to the sacrament, I personally cannot judge the disposition of another person's interior life. You know, I can't judge whether Tom Price receives Holy Communion in a state of grace or even with faith. All right? That judgment's left up to God. But the mercy of God is extended to everyone, and the grace of God is made available to everyone, often in ways that we cannot see and of which we are not the judge.
Bill, thank you so much for your call. Let's go now to Rick in Kentucky. He's actually in Florence, y'all. That would be Florence, Kentucky, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Hey there, Rick. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Dr. Anders. I was just wondering if you could give me the Catholic Church's position on the Freemasons, and I'll take your answer off the air. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. So, Freemasonry is probably the only private association or society that has been singled out as many times and as vehemently for condemnation in Catholic history. No other group has been singled out quite like the Masons by the Catholic hierarchy, and for good reason, because the Masonic Lodge has in its origins a constitution dead set against the influence of Catholics in civil society. All right, and it their philosophy and principles directly contradict the teaching of the Catholic Church. And organizationally, they have, for most of their history, and still to this day in some parts of the world, set themselves explicitly the intention of frustrating Catholic influence in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And all you have to do to see this is keep an eye out for where Masonic lodges are often built, especially in older and Catholic cities. All right, like in my own state of Alabama, Mobile, Alabama is one of the historically Catholic parts of my state, and we have a beautiful cathedral down there in Mobile, and there's a Masonic lodge like 1 block down the street.
Sure
That's
is.
not an accident. That's not an accident. Go to St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
All right, go look at Jesuit Hall at St. Louis University. Big heaping pile of Jesuits all on top of each other. Right down the street, giant Masonic lodge.
Yep.
Not an accident. Not an accident. So you got an organization that says, we're against you, we're fighting you, we want to take you down. What's the Catholic Church supposed to say to that?
Well, exactly.
You know, we say, we love you. You guys come on in, but we're not sending you our people.
Yeah. Okay. Rick, thank you so much for your call. We're going to get to Ann in Essex, Connecticut right now. Ann, you've got a question. What would that be?
I'm interested in knowing more about Melchizedek, who is mentioned in the Mass.
Sure.
But we don't seem to know an awful lot. We know that all priests are in the line of Melchizedek. I went on Google.
Okay.
All right,
We're all
I'm
almost
with
out
you.
of time,
Okay.
man.
So if you go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 14, we encounter this shadowy character named, this enigmatic figure named Melchizedek, who's identified as the priest of God the Most High. All right, and Abraham venerates him and makes an offering of spoil that he had captured in battle, an offering of bread and wine also to Melchizedek. So obviously, when you read the Old Testament allegorically, all right, as replete with typologies that point us to Christ, the New Testament sees in Melchizedek in anticipation of the future priesthood of Christ. It's not the priesthood that we know from the Mosaic Law. It's not the priesthood we know from the tribe of Levi around the ceremonies and sacrifices of the Israelites. This is something that predated that and points to, if you will, an aboriginal recognition of the reality of God by all the nations and the need to offer sacrificial worship to him that, of course, is fulfilled in the universal priesthood of Jesus. And the book of Hebrews, chapter, 7, says that Christ and all the Catholic priests are not priests after the order of Levi, but after the order of Melchizedek, forever.
There we go. And thank you so much for your call. And Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Tom.
Remember that we do this show each and every Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern, with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. And Michael Birchfield, our producer, grabs the best show of the week, in his humble opinion. We'll post that for you on Sundays at 2 p.m. On behalf of Michael, Matt, and Jeff, I'm Tom Price. We'll see you tomorrow right here on another edition of Call to Communion. Have a wonderful day, and God bless.